Some towns remember storms by the fences they laid flat, and some remember hunger by the way a child looked at a loaf of bread and did not ask for it. Folks will tell you charity is a soft thing, but on the frontier it often came with splinters in the hand, mud on the ham, and a reputation risked in public. A good woman did not always arrive with fine words. Sometimes she came carrying a sack of potatoes, with her jaw set hard against the whole world. The church bell in Calder Creek had not yet finished its cold Sunday toll when the 4 Granger children were led across the muddy street from the county wagon to the steps of the meeting house. Phoebe Ellison saw them from behind the pump, where she had stopped to fill 2 pails for Widow Ames. Rain had made the road black and slick, and every wheel rut out a strip of gray sky. The youngest child clutched a cracked red tin cup to her chest like it was a doll. Her bare ankles were purple with cold above shoes too large for her feet. Sheriff Abel Crow stood with his hat in his hands while the town women gathered under the church eaves, shawls pulled tight, eyes moving from child to child and then away. "They can't stay in the jail," he said. "Their mother passed 2 nights ago. Fever took her. Father's been gone near a year." The oldest boy, might be 11, lifted his chin like a man, though his hands shook around the shoulders of the little girl in front of him. Beside him stood a thin girl with a cough she tried to swallow, and another boy with a torn sleeve full of burrs, staring at the mud as if he meant to disappear into it. Mrs. Vale, the minister's wife, pressed her lips together. 4 is too many for one household. "They eat," said Mr. Pritchard, who kept the general store, as though that settled the matter. Phoebe set the water pails down. The pump handle creaked once behind her in the wind. The smallest child looked up when no one answered. "We can work," she whispered. No one moved. "If this story touches something tender in you, tell us where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe a quiet act of mercy can change a whole life." Now come back with me to that muddy church step where one woman chose before she knew the cost. Phoebe's boots made a soft sucking sound in the mud as she crossed the street. Her father's old wool coat hung loose on her shoulders, dark from rain. She was 24, narrow as a fence rail from work and years of making too little stretch across too many days, with brown hair pinned back badly because she had fed hens before dawn and patched a roof leak before breakfast. She was no town beauty. She was the Ellison farm girl, the one people hired when there was washing to be done, eggs to trade, or a sick calf that needed watching. She stopped at the bottom step and looked at the children. "What are their names?" she asked. Sheriff Crow blinked. "Samuel, Lottie, Ben, and Ruth." The oldest boy stiffened at being named. Lottie, the thin girl, pressed her fist to her mouth to hide another cough. Ben, all elbows and suspicion, looked at Phoebe like she might be setting a trap. Ruth held the red cup harder. Phoebe stepped up beneath the eaves. "Have they eaten?" Mrs. Vale glanced toward the closed church door. "There was porridge yesterday." "That wasn't my question." A little murmur moved through the gathered women. Mr. Pritchard cleared his throat. "Now, Miss Ellison, you know sentiment don't put beans in a pot." "No," Phoebe said. "Hands do." The wind lifted the edge of her wet skirt. She looked from face to face, and every one of them found reason to study the boards, the sky, the mud, the church bell rope. "I'll take them for now," she said. Sheriff Crow frowned. "Phoebe," she did not look at him. "For now, your place is a mile beyond the creek," Mrs. Vale said quietly. "You've only got that cabin and the old barn. Your father's debt. I know what I have. And what you don't," Mr. Pritchard added. Phoebe turned then, slow as a door closing. "What I don't have is a belly so full I can stand here and let children freeze while I count the cost out loud." Silence fell hard. Samuel Granger watched her as if he had seen adults make promises before and knew better than to lean on them. Ruth took one step toward Phoebe, then stopped and looked back at him. He gave a small nod that broke Phoebe's heart more than any crying could have. She knelt in the mud, ignoring the way coal seeped through her skirt. "Ruth," she said, "that cup must be important." Ruth's mouth trembled. "Mama gave it to me. It don't leak much if I hold my tomb over the split." Phoebe nodded as though the cup were fine china. "Then we'll be careful with it." Ben's eyes flashed. "We ain't going to no poor farm." "No," Phoebe said. "You're going to my farm." Lottie coughed again. A dry tearing sound. Phoebe stood. "Sheriff, I need my wagon brought around from Ames' place. And if Mrs. Vale can spare one blanket without emptying Heaven's storehouse, I'll take it kindly." Mrs. Vale flushed, but went inside. That was when Micah Turner rode in from the North Road on a dark bay horse, with winter mud up to his chest and his hat pulled low against the rain. He had been out mending the far pasture fence since sunrise, and the weather had made him look carved from the same dark timber as the mountains behind town. His left shoulder sat stiff in his coat from an old break that had never healed right. He reined in near the hitching post when he saw the crowd. Micah Turner was known in Calder Creek as a man who owned land, kept to himself, and had buried more than he spoke of. His wife had died 5 years before in childbed, and the child with her. After that he had let his house go quiet. He still ran cattle and put up hay, still paid what he owed, still showed up when floodwater threatened a bridge or wolves came too near a neighbor's flock. But no one went to the Turner place after dark unless there was blood or fire. His gaze moved over the children, the sheriff, the women, and at last came to rest on Phoebe, standing between the town and the unwanted. "What's happened?" he asked. Sheriff Crow told him in few words. Micah listened without changing expression. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat. When the sheriff finished, Mr. Pritchard said, "Miss Ellison has taken leave of sense. She means to haul all 4 out to that failing patch of hers." Phoebe looked down at Ruth, who had begun shivering in little jerks. "My sense is my own." Micah's horse stamped, splashing mud. "4 children need more than 1 room and a sack of meal," he said. Phoebe felt the words strike the same place as all the others, but his voice held no mockery, only fact. That made it worse somehow. "Then perhaps someone with more rooms should have spoken first," she said. Micah's jaw tightened. The crowd waited, eager in that shameful way crowds can be, hoping somebody else's trouble would turn into a scene worth telling. Micah dismounted. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with a beard kept short and eyes the color of creek stones under snowmelt. He walked to the wagon where Mrs. Vale had laid a brown blanket and lifted it without asking. Then he came to the children and dropped the blanket around Lottie and Ruth. "The Turner place has 2 empty rooms," he said. Phoebe stared at him. He did not meet her eyes. "Barns sound, stove draws. There's milk cow enough and hens when the fox doesn't get bold." Mr. Pritchard made a faint sound. "You, Turner?" Micah looked at him. "Did I speak soft?" "No, but boy." "Then, hear me the first time." The storekeeper shut his mouth. Phoebe's hands were cold and red around the knuckles. "Are you offering them shelter?" "I'm offering work for you and a roof for them." Micah's eyes came to hers then. "Not charity. I need help. House has gone rough. Garden's dead. Laundry's behind. I can't tend calves, fence, wood, and 4 children besides. You come as housekeeper for wages. They come under your care, wages?" Phoebe asked. "$1 a week, board included. More when cattle sell." Mr. Pritchard snorted. "That won't cover what 4 children eat." Micah did not look away from Phoebe. "They won't eat at your store." Something like anger burned behind his quiet words. Phoebe looked down at Samuel. The boy's face stayed guarded, but his eyes had moved toward Micah's horse, toward the bedroll, toward the strong leather reins. Boys who had lost fathers often looked at men that way, with hunger and fear braided together. "And if I say no?" Phoebe asked. "Then I'll haul flour to your place before sundown and fix your roof before the next rain." The answer unsettled her more than persuasion would have. "You don't know me," she said. I know you crossed the mud, that was all. The Turner Ranch sat 3 miles beyond Calder Creek, where the valley narrowed and pine slopes rose blue-black toward the Idaho mountains. The road climbed past cut-high fields silvered with rain, then bent near a stand of cottonwoods whose bare branches scratched the sky. Phoebe rode on the wagon seat beside Micah, while the children huddled in back under blankets and old canvas. No one spoke for the first mile. The wagon wheels knocked over stones. The bay horse pulled steady. A cold mist moved between the pines, and the smell of wet sage mixed with manure, leather, and the faint sourness of frightened children. Phoebe kept one hand on the seatboard, and the other wrapped around her own wrist to stop its trembling. She had said yes, because no had looked like a door closing on 4 small faces. But with each mile, the size of what she had done grew. She had taken children not her kin. She had agreed to live under a widower's roof. By nightfall, every tongue in Calder Creek would be working. Micah looked over once. You cold? No. He reached behind the seat, took a folded coat, and dropped it between them. Use it or don't. She did not use it. Behind them, Ruth whispered. Sam? What? Will there be a stove? Likely. A hot one. Don't know. Ben said I can chop wood. You can hardly lift the axe, Samuel muttered. I can too, Lottie coughed, then said softly. Hush, Miss Ellison can hear. I expect to hear, Phoebe said without turning. And I expect any boy who can boast about chopping wood can start with kindling. Ben went quiet. After a moment, Ruth asked, What's kindling? Little sticks that teach big logs how to burn, Phoebe said. Maya's mouth moved almost like he might smile, but the expression vanished before it was born. The ranch house came into view near dusk, set back from the yard with a porch sagging on one side and a stone chimney breathing thin smoke. A barn stood beyond it, weathered gray, with one door hanging crooked. The corral fence leaned in 2 places. A woodpile sat under a torn tarp, half scattered by weather. There were hens scratching near the pump, and a brindle dog rose from under the porch and gave one uncertain bark. The house was not poor, exactly. It had good bones, thick logs, glass in every window, a roof better than Phoebe's own. But loneliness had been living there so long, it had left signs. A broken gate tied with rope, a rusted bucket near the well, dead bean vines still clinging to poles in the garden, a child's old swing hanging motionless from a cottonwood limb, though no child had used it in years. Phoebe saw Micah notice her noticing. Hadn't had much use for fixing what didn't keep cattle in or weather out, he said. That gate keeps something in, Phoebe replied. What? Sadness? He looked at her then, sharp and startled. She climbed down before he could answer. The children waited in the wagon until Samuel moved first. He jumped down and turned to help Ruth, though he was thin enough that the effort made him stagger. Micah stepped forward, but Samuel's shoulders tightened. Micah stopped and let him manage. Phoebe saw that and stored it away. Inside, the house smelled of cold ashes, coffee, dust, and leather. The main room held a stove, a rough table, 2 chairs, a bench, a cupboard, and a Bible with a cracked black cover sitting beside a lamp. On a peg near the door hung a small blue shawl faded almost white along the folds. It looked too delicate for the house, too tender. Phoebe's eyes touched it once and moved on. Micah saw. My wife's, he said. Phoebe nodded. I won't disturb it. Something in his face closed with relief. The children stood near the door, dripping on the floorboards, afraid to enter too far. Ruth's red cup peeked from beneath the blanket. Lottie looked at the stove like she did not dare believe in heat. Ben stared at the table, where a heel of bread sat under a cloth. Samuel stared at Micah. Phoebe untied her bonnet. Mr. Turner, where is the flour? Bin by the pantry. Beans? Crock under the shelf. Milk? Cows not milked yet? She turned to Samuel. Can you carry water without spilling all of it? Yes, Mom. Good. Ben, you'll bring in kindling, not logs. Lottie, sit by the stove. Ruth, you sit with her and keep that cup safe. Mr. Turner, if there's a cow waiting, she'll not milk herself because we're all tragic. Micah stared at her for a half second. Then he took off his hat. No, Mom. The words came so dry that Ben glanced up, surprised. Phoebe rolled up her sleeves. That first night did not become warm all at once. Nothing true ever does. The fire smoked because the stovepipe needed cleaning. The beans were hard and took too long. Ruth cried when Phoebe tried to take off her wet shoes, not loudly, but with a silent horror that said too many things had already been taken from her. Lottie's cough worsened in the heat, and Samuel refused to eat until the little ones had bowls in hand. Ben stole the heel of bread and hid it under his shirt, then stood white-faced when Phoebe found him. She took the bread, broke it into 4 pieces, and put one beside each bowl. "You don't steal food in this house," she said. Ben's eyes filled with angry tears. "You ask? If your mouth can't ask, your hand can point. If your hand can't point, you sit at the table and I'll know. But you don't steal. You ain't my ma, no friend, don't talk like her." The room was still. Phoebe looked at him a long moment, then set the last piece of bread in his hand. "I couldn't if I tried," she said. Ben looked down. Micah stood near the door with milk pail in hand, watching as if the scene had put a knife under his ribs. He said nothing. Later, when the children had eaten, and Ruth had fallen asleep sitting upright against Lottie's side, he brought in a narrow cot from the back room and set it near the stove. "There are 2 rooms upstairs," he said to Phoebe. "Children can take both. Boys in one, girls in the other. You can have the room off the kitchen. And you, Barn has a loft." "No," she said. He looked tired enough that the word reached him slowly. "No. This is your house. I won't have town gossip saying I put you in your own barn. Town gossip already has a full plate. That doesn't mean we feed it dessert." A flicker crossed his face, almost amusement again. "I sleep on the porch," he said. "You'll sleep in your room. I'll take the kitchen room. The girls can share with me tonight until they settle. The boys can have the upstairs room nearest the chimney. Tomorrow we clean the other." Micah glanced toward the closed door of that unused upstairs room. "No one's been in there," he said. Phoebe understood before he said more. The unused room had belonged to the child who never came home from birth, or the life that died with his wife. Sometimes a door could be a grave marker. "Fen, not tomorrow," she said. "When it's time." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw not the hard rancher Calder Creek feared, but a man worn thin from standing guard over an absence. "Thank you," he said. It was hardly more than breath. That night Phoebe lay on a thick mattress with Lottie coughing beside her, and Ruth curled at her feet, the red cup still in one hand. Rain tapped the window. In the main room, Micah's steps moved once across the floor, stopped near the stove, then retreated. The house settled. Somewhere upstairs, Ben cried for less than a minute into something meant to muffle the sound. Phoebe did not sleep until nearly dawn. By then, she had already counted the flour, checked the beans, noted the cracked pane in the pantry, planned laundry, measured the woodpile with her eyes, and wondered what kind of woman she had become to be lying under a stranger's roof with 4 orphan children and a debt on her father's farm, waiting like a wolf beyond the valley. Morning came pale and cold. Phoebe rose before the children and found Micah outside by the pump, breaking a skin of ice from the trough with the back of an axe. His breath smoked in the blue light. He wore no coat, only a wool shirt with sleeves rolled to the forearms, and the old injury in his shoulder showed in how carefully he lifted. "You'll tear that out open if you keep working coals," she said from the porch. He glanced up. "Shoulders old pain still knows how to bite, as so does old debt." She stiffened. He set the axe down. "Didn't mean offense. Folks usually don't when they mention it." "That doesn't make it lighter." The bobcats slipped across the yard. Hens muttered under the coop. From inside came Ruth's small voice asking where she was. Then Lottie's soft answer. Micah wiped his hands on his trousers. "Pritchard holds your note?" He bought it from the bank after my father died. That man doesn't buy anything unless he expects to squeeze it. Phoebe came down the steps. Then he and the note suit each other. Micah studied her. What do you owe? That's not your concern. It is if he uses it to trouble you here. I've been troubled before, I doubt it. They stood in the cold yard with the pump between them. Phoebe had known men who pushed questions because they liked the power of making a woman answer. Micah did not push. That made her more aware of the question left standing. $136, she said at last. Due after harvest. Only there wasn't enough harvest. His face did not change, but his hand tightened once on the pump handle. That farm worth more than that. To me, yes. To Pritchard, it is worth whatever shame he can get out of it. Micah looked toward the road, where town lay hidden beyond pines and mist. Eat breakfast before you start fighting the whirl. She gave a small, unwilling laugh. Is that advice? That's experience. By noon, the Turner place had begun to make different sounds. The pump handle squealed as Samuel worked it. Ben split kindling with fierce, awkward chops beside the woodpile, missing as often as he struck, but refusing to quit. Lottie sat wrapped in the brown blanket near the table, shelling dried beans into a bowl, each cough bending her like a reed. Ruth followed Phoebe from stove to pantry to wash basin, holding clothespins in her cup because she had decided the cup was a basket now. Micah brought down a sack of potatoes from the root cellar and carried in 2 armloads of wood. He said little, but he fixed the kitchen chair that wobbled, tightened the loose hinge on the pantry, and set a nail near the stove where Phoebe could hang the dish towel instead of laying it over a chair. She noticed each repair. She said nothing at first. At dinner, which was potatoes fried in drippings with milk gravy and the last of some salt pork, Ben ate too fast and made himself cough. Ruth fell asleep with her cheek near her plate. Samuel asked if there was work in the barn after, and when Micah said yes, the boy rose before the meal was done. Sit, Micah said. Samuel froze. You finish first. I'm not lazy. Didn't say you were. I can work. I know. Then why? Because a hungry boy makes a poor hand and a worse decision. Samuel's face went tight with confusion, unused to correction without contempt. Slowly he sat. Phoebe kept her eyes on the gravy pan. The days that followed came one upon another like stitches. Phoebe washed every blanket in the house and hung them on the line until the yard smelled of lye soap and wet wool. She scrubbed the table twice, then a third time when Ruth spilled milk and burst into tears, as if a hanging offense had been committed. She cleaned the stovepipe with Micah holding the ladder and Ben watching solemnly, his face streaked with soot after he tried to help. She found dried apples in a crock and made a thin sauce that made Lottie close her eyes after the first bite. Micah repaired the corral fence with Samuel at his side, showing him how to hold a rail with his knee and drive a nail without bending it. He let the boy fail 3 times before taking the hammer and demonstrating once. Don't hit like you're angry at it, Micah said. Hit like you mean to send it home. Samuel looked at him. Ain't that the same? No, the boy thought on that all afternoon. Ben took to the hens, not gently at first. He chased them until Phoebe caught him by the collar and put a cracked egg in his palm. You scare a hen, she hides her eggs, she said. She's just a chicken. And you're just a boy. Still, I expect you'd rather not be chased by giants. After that, Ben approached the coop with exaggerated care, whispering insults under his breath. Within a week, the speckled hen let him lift her without flapping, and he carried the first warm egg inside like a gold nugget. Lottie's cough worried Phoebe. She made onion syrup with sugar Micah rode into town to buy, though she had not asked. Lottie hated the taste, but took it while staring at Phoebe with watery, obedient eyes. You can make a face, Phoebe told her. Mama said, faces sour the medicine. Your mama was trying to get medicine down. I'm telling you, a face helps the swallowing. Lottie considered this, then made such a bitter little grimace that Ruth giggled. It was the first child's laugh the Turner house had heard in years. Micah was coming through the door with an armload of wood when it happened. He stopped, one boot on the threshold, and the logs shifted in his arms. Phoebe saw his face before he turned away. That evening, he stayed outside longer than chores required. Later, after the children slept, Phoebe found him on the porch, sitting on the step with his elbows on his knees. The moon had broken through clouds, laying silver along the fence rails. The dog slept near his boots. She set a cup of coffee beside him. "I'll get cold," she said. "Most things do." She leaned against the porch post, shawl around her shoulders. "Not if someone tends them." He did not answer. Inside, the stove clicked and settled. Beyond the barn, a horse blew softly in the dark. "My wife's name was Ellen," he said at last. Phoebe stayed still. She liked blue things. That shawl, a ribbon. Morning glories along the fence one summer. His voice was low, almost flat. She wanted a house full. Said quiet made her ears ache. Phoebe watched the moonlight on the yard. "She died before the first cry," he said. "Baby too. I had wood stacked, cradle made, garden planted. I remember thinking the beans didn't know. They just kept climbing. The words entered the night and stayed there." Phoebe's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." He nodded once, not because sorry helped, but because refusing it would have been unkind. "After that," he said, "I kept what had to live alive. Cattle, horses, myself, mostly. Let the rest go." Phoebe thought of the dead bean vines in the garden, the tide gate, the dusty room upstairs. "The rest waited," she said. He looked up at her. She had not meant to say it, but it was true. Micah picked up the coffee and drank. His hand was large around the tin cup. "What about you?" he asked. "My mother died when I was 16. My father followed slow. He stayed breathing 6 years, but grief and whiskey had most of him before fever did." She pulled the shawl closer. "I learned numbers because creditors respect numbers more than tears. Learned hens because eggs trade even when folks don't like you. Learned to keep a roof patched because rain doesn't pity women alone. Was there no one?" The question was soft. Phoebe looked at the dark garden. "There was a man once, Thomas Bell. He said he'd marry me after my father died. Then Pritchard told him what was owed. Thomas married a woman with 2 milk cows and a clean title. My shy's mouth hardened. 'I don't blame him,' she said. 'I might.' That made her look at him. His eyes remained on the yard, but anger sat plain in his jaw. 'Don't,' she said. 'I spent enough time blaming myself. No sense wasting yours.' He turned the cup in his hand. 'You think you were left because of debt? I know I was. I think some men are too small to stand beside a woman carrying anything heavy.' The porch went quiet. Phoebe looked away first. The next Sunday, they went to town because flour was low. Lottie needed horehound, and Phoebe refused to hide as though she had done wrong. Micah hitched the wagon. The children wore clothes she had mended by lamplight. Samuel's trousers patched at both knees, Ben's sleeve rissoon, Lottie's dress let down with a strip of brown calico, Ruth's shoes stuffed with wool so they no longer slipped. Before they left, Ruth stood by the door touching the red cup now tied with a string around her wrist. "Don't we have to go where they look?" she asked. Phoebe knelt and buttoned the child's coat. "They might look again." Ruth's lip trembled. "But you will not be standing alone this time." Ruth looked past her at Micah, who waited by the wagon with reins in hand. Then at Samuel. Then at Ben, who had egg straw in his hair. Then at Lottie, pale but upright. "Will we come back here?" Ruth whispered. Phoebe's fingers paused on the last button. Micah answered from the yard, "Yes." The certainty of it settled over them all. In town, eyes followed the wagon from the livery to Pritchard's store. Conversation thinned as they stepped inside. The store smelled of coffee beans, molasses, lamp oil, and wool. Barrels lined one wall. tins another. A bell over the door gave a bright little sound, too cheerful for the faces that turned. Mr. Pritchard stood behind the counter, thumbs tucked in his vest. "Well," he said, "the foundling parade." Samuel went rigid, Ben's fists closed. Lottie looked at the floor. Ruth hid behind Phoebe's skirt. Phoebe walked to the counter. 20 pounds flour, 2 pounds sugar, whorehound, kerosene. Needles if you've got number 7. Pritchard smiled thinly. "Buying on Turner's account, I suppose." Micah stepped in behind them. "Mine. Dangerous thing. A man putting his account under a woman's hand." Phoebe felt heat rise in her face, but before she could speak, Micah set a folded list on the counter. "She's running my household," he said. "You will treat her orders as mine." The store went very still. Pritchard's smile faded a notch. "Household, is it? Folks might wonder what kind." Micah's voice did not rise. "Let them wonder near enough for me to answer." No one breathed for a moment. Phoebe looked at him, startled by the controlled fury in him. He was not defending himself. He was defending her name, in a room where names could be dirty forever. Pritchard weighed the flour with stiff movements. As he wrapped the whorehound, his eyes slid to Phoebe. "Your note comes due soon." "I know the date." "Knowing won't pay it." Micah reached for his wallet. Phoebe's hand caught his wrist before thought could stop her. The contact surprised them both. His skin was worn from his coat sleeve. She let go quickly. "No," she said. Pritchard saw it all and smiled again. Micah looked down at her. She could feel the whole store listening. Phoebe lifted her chin. "My debt is mine." "I didn't say otherwise." Micah said. "You were about to." His eyes held hers, steady and unreadable. "I was about to ask how much time he'd sell you if I bought feed here through winter." That was different. Not rescue. Leverage. Still, pride rose sharp in her. "I can bargain my own time." "I expect you can." Pritchard cleared his throat, irritated at not being the center of the knife fight. "No bargains. Full payment or I file claim." Samuel spoke then, his voice cracking. "How much?" Phoebe turned. "Samuel, how much does she owe?" Pritchard looked amused. "More than foundlings can earn picking pockets." The boy went white. Micah's hand came down flat on the counter. The sound cracked through the store like a rifle shot. "You will not use that word again?" Pritchard leaned back. Maya's voice stayed low. "Not about them. Not about her. Not in my hearing." A bolt of silence held the room. Then old Mrs. Keene, who had come in for lamp wicks, said from the back, "I'll take 24 eggs if Miss Ellison has hens laying." Phoebe turned, startled. Mrs. Keene did not look at Pritchard. "My rheumatism's bad. Could use laundry help too." Another woman, younger, shifted near the calico bolts. "I need mending done. Shirts mostly." Phoebe understood then what Micah's public defense had opened. Not kindness exactly. Permission. Sometimes one person standing firm gave others a way to step closer without being first. "I can bring eggs Wednesday," Phoebe said. "And laundry Friday," Mrs. Keene replied. Pritchard tied the parcel of needles with string and slapped it down. "On the wagon ride home," Ben said. "I could throw a rock through his window." "No," Phoebe said. "A little rock?" "No, Micah. Click to the horse." "Windows cost money. Pride is cheaper." Ben frowned. "What's that mean?" Samuel answered quietly. "Means don't give him a bill." Micah nodded once. "Boy listens." Samuel looked down, but Phoebe saw the small lift of his mouth. October thinned into November. Frost silvered the yard each morning. The children changed by inches, as children do when fed, and not frightened every hour. Samuel began rising early to help Micah with the horses. He spoke little, but he watched everything. One morning Phoebe saw him leave half his biscuit on the table and slide it toward Ruth without looking. Micah saw too. The next day, he put an extra biscuit on Samuel's plate and said only, "That one's yours." Samuel stared at it a long time before eating. Lottie's cough eased with syrup, warmth, and rest. She liked folding laundry and lining things by size. She hummed when she thought no one could hear. Little hymn fragments her mother must have sung. Phoebe gave her a needle and scraps, and Lottie stitched a crooked cloth dress for the Red Cup, declaring Ruth's treasure needed Sunday clothes. Ben became lord of the hens and enemy of the fox. He built traps that caught nothing but his own boot once. He named the speckled hen Mrs. General, and gave reports at supper whether anyone asked or not. He still hid food sometimes, a potato in his pocket, a crust under his pillow. Phoebe never shamed him. She simply brought the hidden thing back to the table and said, "Food sleeps in the pantry." After a while, he began putting crusts there himself. Ruth followed Micah in a way that made him uncomfortable at first. She stood near while he mended harness. She watched him shave by the water basin with solemn fascination. She brought him nails one at a time when he fixed the porch step, each nail carried in the Red Cup. "Thank you," he said after the fifth. She nodded gravely. "You need many, I do, because things are broke." He looked at the sagging rail in his hand. "Yes." She touched the porch post, but not all the way. Micah glanced toward Phoebe, who was hanging laundry. She pretended not to hear. One afternoon, the first snow came early, blowing over the ridge in hard white grains. Micah and Samuel were out, bringing cattle down from the upper pasture. Phoebe saw the sky turn and tied her shawl tight. Ben, wood in, Lottie, stove hot, but not roaring. Ruth, gather clothespins. Quickly now. The wind struck before the men returned. It rattled the window panes and drove smoke low over the yard. Phoebe got the laundry down half frozen, carried water, checked the barn lantern, and stood at the door watching the road vanish. Ruth came beside her with a cup in both hands. "Will they get lost?" "No, you don't know." Phoebe looked down. The child deserved truth, but not fear sharpened beyond use. "I know Mr. Turner knows these hills," she said, "and I know Samuel is stubborn enough to follow him through a wall of snow." Ben came up behind them. "Sam ain't scared?" Lottie, pale in the firelight, whispered, "Sam gets scared when folks sleep too quiet." The words landed hard. Phoebe turned from the door. "What do you mean?" Lottie's eyes filled. "After Mama got fever, he stayed awake to hear if she breathed. Now when Ruth sleeps deep, he shakes her foot." Ben stared at the floor. Phoebe crouched before them. "Then tonight, when he comes in, we'll make enough noise that he knows everyone here is breathing." "How?" Ruth asked. "You will tell him about Mrs. General laying behind the oats?" Ben brightened despite himself. "She did, like a fool. And Lottie will hum if her throat allows. And I'll burn the gravy if I must." Ruth's eyes widened. "On purpose? For Samuel, perhaps." They came in after dark, horse and men covered in snow, Micah's shoulder stiff and Samuel's lips nearly blue. Phoebe met them with hot water, dry socks, and anger born of worry. "You should have turned back sooner." Micah peeled off his gloves with difficulty. Cattle disagreed. Cattle don't get supper until people are alive to feed them. Samuel swayed where he stood. Phoebe took his sleeve. He flinched, then steadied. "Sit," she said. "I need to rub down." "I do the horse," Ben said loudly. Everyone looked at him. He swallowed. "I know where the brush is." Micah considered him. "You take the dog. Stay out of hooves. I'll come when my fingers work." Ben ran before anyone could change his mind. That night, the house made sound. Ruth told the hen story 3 times. Lottie hummed off key. Phoebe did not burn the gravy, but she let the spoon clatter more than needed. Micah set Samuel near the stove and wrapped a blanket around his shoulders without making tenderness a spectacle. Samuel looked at the blanket, then at him. "I could Vive kept writing. I know, I and weak. No, I just got cold." Micah sat across from him, steam rising from his own wet shirt. "Cold can kill a strong man quicker than shame can save him." Samuel's face worked. He looked away. Phoebe saw his fingers grip the blanket and not let go. After the snow, the ranch turned inward. Days began in darkness with coffee ground by hand, stove stirred, biscuits cut, milk strained, eggs counted, wood hauled. The children's chores became marks of belonging. Samuel hung his cap on the same peg each night. Ben kept a tally of eggs with charcoal on the inside of the pantry door until Phoebe told him walls were not ledgers, and then gave him a scrap of paper. Lottie folded Maya's shirt smaller than Phoebe did. Ruth placed her red cup on the table at supper, no longer clutched to her chest. Phoebe changed too, though she would not have named it. Her hands learned where Micah kept the good hammer and the leather awl. She knew which floorboard groaned by the kitchen room, and how to open the pantry door without waking Lottie. She began leaving coffee on the back of the stove when Micah rode out before dawn. He began bringing in extra water before she asked. One evening, she found a pair of gloves on the peg near her shawl. They were plain work gloves, used but mended carefully with new stitching across the tongue. "Those yours?" she asked. Micah did not look up from sharpening a knife. "Too small? They weren't here yesterday. Found them." "Where?" "In a place where gloves are." Ben laughed into his cup and nearly spilled milk. Phoebe took the gloves. Inside one was a scrap of blue thread where the mending had been tied off. She looked at Micah, but he had become intensely interested in the knife edge. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. That night, while wind pressed against the house, Phoebe took out her father's pocket watch from the bottom of her trunk. It no longer ran. The brass case was dented, the glass cracked across the 6. She held it in her palm on the kitchen bed and remembered her father before grief made him unreliable, laughing in wheat dust, teaching her to plant potatoes by the dark of the moon, letting her listen to the watch tick when storms frightened her. Micah appeared in the doorway to set down a basket of dried kindling. He saw the watch. "Your father's." "Yes, my." She hesitated, then handed it to him. He turned it gently in his big hands. "Mainsprings likely gone. You know watches." "My father did. I know enough to disappoint one." She smiled faintly. He opened the back, looked, then closed it. "I have tools somewhere. Small ones. Might make it tick, might ruin it worse. It already doesn't run. That ain't always an invitation to break a thing." The words held more than watches. Phoebe took it back. "No, sometimes it's an invitation to try." Their fingers touched around the brass case. Neither moved for one breath. Then Ruth coughed in her sleep, and Phoebe drew away. In late November, Trouble came dressed in a clean coat. Thomas Bell rode to the Turner Ranch on a cold Saturday, with his collar turned up and his horse shod bright. Phoebe saw him through the window while rolling pie dough made from dried apples and precious sugar. For a moment she was 20 again, standing at her father's gate while Thomas promised a June wedding with his hat in his hand and fear already in his eyes. Micah was in the barn. Samuel and Ben were stacking wood. Lottie read Ruth letters from an old primer by the stove. Phoebe wiped flour from her hands and went to the porch. Thomas removed his hat. He was still handsome in the polished way of men who avoid weather when they can. His cheeks were ruddy, his boots clean above the mud line. "Phoebe," he said, "you look well." "I look busy," his smile faltered. "I heard about your situation. Most folks have. I didn't want to believe it. That I was working. That you were living here." His eyes moved past her to the house. With him. With those children. The old hurt in her did not rise as strongly as she expected. It was there, but thin. Worn out, perhaps. "What do you want, Thomas?" He stepped closer. "Pritchard means to take your farm. He's been speaking of it openly. Says he'll file before Christmas if payment isn't made." I know. I can help." She said nothing. "My wife's uncle has interest in land east of Boise. I could speak for you. There might be a position. House service. Respectable." He glanced again toward the house. "Away from talk." Phoebe stared at him. You came to offer me respectability. I came because I once cared. Once? She said. Color climbed his neck. You can't intend to stay here, a woman alone under a widower's roof, 4 orphan children, not blood to either of you. People are saying things. People say things when their mouths are empty and their hands are clean. Phoebe, no. You haven't heard the terms. I heard enough when you said away. Thomas looked wounded, which angered her more than cruelty would have. You are throwing your life away, he said. The barn door opened behind him. Micah stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped when he saw Thomas, but did not approach. Phoebe noticed that. He left the choice to her. Thomas noticed too, and misread it. Even he knows this cannot last. Phoebe's hands curled at her sides. Mr. Turner has given shelter without asking me to become smaller to fit inside it. That is more than I can say for many. Thomas's mouth tightened. You'll regret pride when you lose your farm, perhaps. And the children, her voice lowered. Do not use them to frighten me. He replaced his hat. I tried to help. No, Phoebe said. You tried to make leaving sound like rescue. Thomas rode away stiff-backed. Micah remained by the barn until the horse disappeared down the road. Then he crossed the yard slowly. You all right? He asked. Phoebe folded her arms against the cold. I burned nothing. That wasn't what I asked. No, she said. But it's the answer I can give. He nodded. Fair. She looked toward the road. Pritchard means to file before Christmas. I hurt. I want. Let him use my farm to pull me away from those children. Micah's face was quiet. Your farm matters. So do they. I know. She looked at him then. Do you? His eyes held hers. Yes. A shout came from the woodpile. Ben had dropped a log on his toe and was trying not to cry. Phoebe and Micah both moved at once. That evening the pie was a little scorched on one edge. No one complained. Micah ate 2 pieces as if proving something. Ruth fed crumbs to the dog under the table. Samuel watched Phoebe with a new worry in his face. After supper, he followed her to the pantry. Are we making you lose your place? He asked. Phoebe set the flour lid down. Who told you that? I hear. She bent so their eyes were level. Samuel had grown less gaunt, but fear could make him look starved again in an instant. No child in this house is a debt against me, she said. But if you hadn't taken us, if I hadn't taken you, I would still owe money. I would still work. I would still face Pritchard. Trouble doesn't become your fault because it met you on the road. His jaw trembled. He looked away hard. My ma said I had to keep them together, he whispered. Phoebe's chest ached. Then you and I have the same task. He nodded once fiercely and went back to the main room. By December, snow lay in the fence corners and along the north side of the barn. Micah sold 2 steers early, though prices were poor. Phoebe knew because she saw him at the table long after midnight. Figures scratched on paper, his hand pressed to his bad shoulder. When she came in for water, he covered the page. Dawns, she said softly. He moved his hand. The numbers told their own hard story. Feed, kerosene, flour. Her wages paid regular in small coins. She kept wrapped in cloth in her trunk. Dr. Money still owed from Ellen's death, though years old. A mortgage payment due in spring. You sold early, she said. Had to. For us. For the ranch. She gave him a look. For all of it, he admitted. Phoebe sat across from him. The lamp painted hollows beneath his eyes. I won't be the reason you lose land. He leaned back. And I won't be the man who had rooms empty while children froze. The line stood between them, simple and immovable. She looked at the paper. How much can you spare toward my note without harming spring feet? Not enough. How much, Phoebe? How much? His jaw worked. 50, she breathed out. $50 was a fortune and not enough. I have 21, she said, in wages, and egg money, laundry, mending. That leaves 65, is. The stove hissed as a damp log caught. Micah rubbed his shoulder. I could sell the bay. No. Head bring. No. You need him. I need. You need to stop cutting pieces off yourself because other people are bleeding. His eyes lifted. She had spoken too sharply. She softened her voice. That horse is work, not luxury. Silence. Then he said, Ellen used to say the same about coffee. What? When I'd threatened to quit buying it to save money, she'd say a man who works from dark to dark is allowed one cup that tastes like living. Phoebe looked toward the stove, where coffee sat warming because she had left it there. Micah followed her gaze. The air changed, not dramatically, more like a match catching inside a closed lantern. Before either could speak, Ruth cried out from the kitchen room. Phoebe rose fast. The child was hot when Phoebe touched her forehead. By morning, Ruth's cheeks burned scarlet, and her breath came too quick. Lottie hovered near, eyes wide with remembered fever. Samuel stood in the doorway, face emptied of color. Ben kept whispering, "She was fine yesterday," as if arguing with God. Micah rode for Dr. Harlan through falling snow. The doctor came near noon, old coat dusted white, bag in hand. He listened to Ruth's chest, checked her throat, asked questions, and left powders with instructions. Fever, he said, not the same as took their mother, likely. Keep her warm but not stifled. Sponge her, broth if she could swallow. Watch the breathing. Likely was not a word children could rest on. For 2 days, the house narrowed to Ruth's bed, the stove, the water basin, and the clock that did not tick because Phoebe's father's watch still lay broken on the shelf. Phoebe slept in pieces. Micah carried water, split wood, held Ruth upright when coughing shook her, and sat with Samuel outside the kitchen room when the boy could not bear to look and could not bear to leave. On the second night, Ruth turned her face away from broth. "Cup," she whispered. Phoebe placed the red cup in her hands. Ruth's fingers were too weak to hold it steady. Broth dribbled down her chin. "I spilled," she cried faintly. "It's only broth," Mama said. "Don't waste." Micah, standing at the foot of the bed, turned his face away. Phoebe wiped Ruth's chin. "Your mama wanted you fed more than she wanted clean blankets." Ruth's eyes fluttered. "Will Sam leave if I sleep?" No, he watches." "I know. Tell him I'm breathing." Phoebe swallowed. "I will." Ruth slept. Phoebe found Samuel sitting under the table in the main room, knees drawn up, too big for such hiding and too young not to need it. "She's breathing," Phoebe said. His face crumpled once before he mastered it. Micah stood by the stove, helpless as any man before a child's fever. Phoebe looked at him. "Talk," she said. "To who?" "To Samuel. To yourself. To the room." "I don't care. He needs sound." Micah sat on the floor near the table, not too close. "When I was 12, he began, voice rough. "My brother Caleb fell through creek ice. I thought if I stopped watching him, I'd die. My father found me awake at dawn, holding a lantern over Caleb's face. Samuel did not move. Father said, 'A body can't keep another alive by staring.' I hated him for it, but he was right about one thing. I was no use half dead from fear." Samuel's voice came from under the table. "Did Caleb live?" "Yes." "Where is he?" "Buried in Oregon. Fever. Years later." Samuel looked up then, startled by the honesty. Micah's face was shadowed. "Loving doesn't make us powerful as we want. It just makes us willing to stay." Phoebe stood in the kitchen doorway, holding the basin, and felt those words enter places in her she had kept boarded. By morning, Ruth's fever broke. Sweat dampened her hair, and she woke asking if Mrs. General had laid an egg. Ben burst into tears, and then denied it angrily while wiping his face on his sleeve. Lottie laughed and coughed at once. Samuel went outside and stood behind the barn alone until Micah followed him, not speaking, just standing near enough that the boy would not be alone with relief. That afternoon, Phoebe fell asleep in a chair by the stove. When she woke, a blanket covered her. The coffee was warm, and the kitchen had been swept badly, but earnestly. Micah sat at the table with her father's watch open before him, tiny tools laid out on a cloth. "You found them," she said, voice thick with sleep. "Found a mess, the watch. My skill." She came to stand beside him. The brass pieces looked impossibly small between his fingers. "Why now?" she asked. He did not look up. House needed a sound that wasn't fear. She watched him work in silence. After a while, with a delicate adjustment and a muttered word under his breath, the watch began to tick. Phoebe covered her mouth. The sound was faint, uneven, but alive. Micah placed it in her palm. She felt the little heartbeat of it against her skin. Tears came before she could stop them. Not many, but enough. He looked stricken. "I didn't mean." "I know." He sat still. She closed her fingers over the watch. "Thank you." His hand lay on the table, scarred and still. She put her free hand over it. Neither of them spoke. The watch ticked between them like something forgiven, though neither knew by whom. The thaw of that moment did not save them from winter. Pritchard filed his claim on December 17th. Sheriff Crow rode out with the paper himself, shame red in his face above his beard. Phoebe read the notice once on the porch, while wind worried at the edges. The legal words were cold and tidy. Payment due in 10 days or property would be auctioned at county steps. Her father's land, her mother's lilac bush, the cabin roof she had patched with her own hands. Micah stood beside her. "How much now?" he asked. "Full note," Fees added. $151. The sheriff removed his hat. "I'm sorry, Phoebe. I told him waiting until spring would be decent. Decency can't be collected with interest," she said. Sheriff Crow looked at Micah. "There's more. Pritchard's been saying the children ought to be placed proper before Christmas. Says there's no legal adoption, no blood relation. Says Miss Allison's situation here is unstable." Phoebe felt the porch tilt under her. Micah's voice went very quiet. "Placed where? Different homes. Boise, my bay. One family said they'd take the little girl. A mining camp cook says he could use the oldest boy. I don't know about the others." "No," Phoebe said. The word came from her like a door slammed against a storm. Sheriff Crow looked miserable. "I ain't saying it'll happen. I'm saying he's stirring it." Micah took the paper from Phoebe before the wind could tear it. "What court?" "County judge comes through for Christmas docket 3 days from now. Then we go." After the sheriff left, Phoebe walked to the woodpile and began stacking logs already stacked. Her hands moved without purpose. One log fell, struck her shin, and she did not feel it. Micah came near but did not touch her. "Phoebe, I can't lose them. I told Samuel trouble didn't become his fault because it met him on the road. Now it has." "No," she turned on him. "Yes, Pritchard is doing this because I crossed him, because I stood in that store, because I came here, because he is cruel when cruelty profits him." Her breath shook. Micah stepped closer. "Look at me." She did not. "Phoebe," she looked. His face held fear now, open and plain. "Not for cattle, not for money, for them. We will not let him scatter those children." The certainty should have comforted her. Instead it broke something. "You can't promise that." "I can promise what I'll do." "What? Sell your horse? Your land? Put yourself under Pritchard's tomb too?" Yeah. No." She backed away. "No, Micah. I won't be Ellen's ghost in another form. I won't be the woman whose need makes you bury yourself alive." Pain flashed across his face. She regretted it instantly, but fear drove her harder than kindness. "I'm taking them to my farm tonight," she said. "If I'm to lose it, I'll lose it standing there. I won't have the court say I hid behind you. The roof leaks. I'll set pots. It's below freezing. I've been cold before. The children, Are mine to answer for. His voice dropped. Are they? She went still. He looked as if he hated himself for the question, but it had been asked. Phoebe's eyes burned. Not by law. Thank you for reminding me. She walked into the house. By dusk, she had packed the children's few things into a trunk and 2 sacks. Samuel understood first and said nothing. Lottie folded Ruth's cup dress and tucked it carefully around the red tin. Ben kicked the pantry door and then apologized to it when Phoebe looked at him. Ruth asked if the hens were coming. No, Phoebe said softly. Then Mrs. General want no. Ben turned away. Micah stood in the doorway as they prepared to leave, his coat on, hat in hand. Storm's coming, he said. Phoebe tied the last sack. Then we should go before it worsens. He looked at the children, then back at her. I'll drive you. No, Phoebe, no. The room held all the things neither could say. Samuel picked up 1 sack. His face was closed again. The boy from the church steps returned. That hurt Micah visibly. As Phoebe reached for the trunk handle, Micah crossed the room and put his hand on it. Don't go like this, he said. She stared at his hand. His voice was low, not angry, not alone, not because I said a fool thing out of fear. Her throat tightened. I don't know how to hold what matters, he said. I either leave it untouched or grip till it breaks. I'm trying to learn different. No grand speech, no promise dressed in lace, just that. Ruth stepped from behind Lottie. Mr. Turner, if we go, who will give you nails? Micah closed his eyes. Phoebe bent her head. Outside, the first hard pellets of sleet struck the window. Samuel said, barely audible, I don't want to start over again. That was what stopped her. Not Micah's hand, not the storm. The boy's confession, small and stripped of pride. Phoebe let go of the trunk. Micah did not move. She whispered, Neither do I. He took his hand from the trunk slowly, as if not to frighten a wild thing. Stay, he said. She looked at him through tears she would not shed. For tonight, he agreed, though both knew the words meant more. The storm came mean. It threw ice against the windows and bent the cottonwoods low. All night, the house held them. The repair stovepipe drew clean. The stacked wood lasted. The mended porch did not give. The gate Micah had fixed stayed latched. Small labors became shelter. At dawn, snow covered the yard deep enough to blur every rut. And Ben was gone. They found the back door unlatched, his coat missing, his boots dragged from the mat. On the table lay 3 eggs wrapped in cloth, the entire fortune of his hens. Samuel knew before anyone spoke. He went to sell them. Phoebe's blood turned cold. To Old Town. He heard about the money. Micah was already reaching for his coat. The storm had stopped, but the world outside was white and treacherous. A small boy could lose the road where it crossed the creek. Micah saddled the bay with hands that moved fast despite his shoulder. Samuel insisted on coming. Phoebe did not waste time refusing. Then ride behind him and do what he says. I'm going to, she said to Micah. He opened his mouth. She pointed toward the barn. Harness the wagon or saddle me a horse. Those are your choices. He saddled the mare. They found Ben's tracks past the hen house, down the lane, then nearly lost them where wind had swept snow across open ground. The cold bit through Phoebe's gloves. Her breath burned. Micah rode ahead, reading breaks in crust and bent grass. Samuel sat behind him, rigid, calling Ben's name until his voice cracked. They found the boy near the creek crossing, one leg through thin ice at the edge, both hands clawed around a willow root. His lips were blue. The wrapped eggs lay broken on the snow beside him, yellow yolk bright as spilled coins. I'm sorry, he sobbed when he saw them. I was going to help. I was going to pay. Phoebe slid from the mare and nearly fell. Micah reached the bank first, lying flat to spread his weight. Inching forward, Ben, he said, calm in a way that made Phoebe understand terror had turned him steady. Look at me. I broke them. Eggs break. Pritchar won't take broken. I Don't care about Pritchard. I can't feel my foot. I know. Give me your hand. I'll pull you in. You want? Ben's fingers slipped. Samuel made a sound like an animal. Micah stretched farther. The ice cracked beneath his chest. Phoebe dropped beside him and grabbed the back of his belt with both hands. I've got you. His eyes flicked to hers once. Then he reached and caught Ben's wrist. The boy screamed as Micah hauled him up, ice breaking around his leg. Phoebe pulled backward with everything she had, boots sliding. Samuel seized Micah's coat. Together they dragged boy and man onto solid snow. Micah wrapped Ben inside his own coat and lifted him, despite the pain that tore across his face. Ben clutched his shirt. Don't send me off. Micah held him tighter. No one is sending you off. I tried to be worth keeping. The words struck all three adults and near-adult hearts there on the creek bank. Phoebe put her hands on Ben's frozen face. You were worth keeping before you brought eggs, before you chopped wood, before you did one useful thing. Ben sobbed then, ugly and loud and alive. Micah looked over his head at Phoebe. His eyes were wet from wind or more. We go home, he said. Home. No one corrected him. Ben's foot was not frostbitten, thanks to wool socks and mercy. Dr. Harlan came and scolded everyone with equal vigor. Ben spent 2 days near the stove, furious at being fussed over, and secretly pleased when Mrs. General's eggs were brought to him for inspection. But the creek incident changed the house. It took the last false bottom out of everyone's fear. Samuel stopped, pretending he could survive without comfort. Lottie began singing where others could hear. Ruth left her red cup on the shelf for half a day and forgot to worry. Phoebe stopped speaking of the children as a task she had accepted and began once to say or before catching herself. Micah heard. 2 days before court, he rode to town alone. He returned after dark, leading the bay instead of riding. Snow clung to his hat. His face was gray with exhaustion. Phoebe met him in the barn, where the lantern swung gently from a beam. What did you do? She asked. He took off his gloves slowly. Sold the North 40 to Amos Vale. Her breath left. Micah, not the main pasture. Timber strip and creek meadow. That meadow feeds your herd in dry months. I'll manage fewer cattle. For my debt, for the children's petition. Your debt? Court fees. Doctor, a little left for seed. She stared at him, horror and gratitude warring until both became pain. You had no right. Nah, the answer stopped her. He looked at her across the lantern light. I had no right to decide what pride you should carry. I know that. But I had land lying quiet while Pritchard sharpened papers to cut living children apart. Tears blurred her sight. You sold Ellen's morning glories. He flinched. The creek meadow had been where she planted them. Phoebe knew without being told. Micah's voice roughened. Ellen wanted a house full. Don't make her pay for this. I'm not. He stepped closer, then stopped. I'm letting what she loved become shelter instead of shrine. The barn smelled of hay and horse sweat and cold leather. Snow whispered against the roof. Phoebe pressed both hands to her mouth. For once, she had no practical answer. Micah reached into his coat and drew out a folded paper. There's more, he said. I filed intention with Sheriff Crow to stand as guardian for the children. Joint, if the judge allows it. Joint, you and me. She looked up. He swallowed. Only for the law, if that's all you want. I wouldn't use it to bind you, but the court listens better when a man with land speaks, and I am ashamed I'm true. But I'll use it. Phoebe took the paper with trembling fingers. And after, she whispered, after, you choose, always. If you want your farm clear and the children there, I'll help move beds. If you want wages here, they stand. If you want, his voice failed. She waited. He looked at the lantern instead of her. If you want a life here not measured in wages, I would count that a mercy I don't deserve. The words were plain. Scared, offered open-handed, Phoebe stepped closer and laid her palm against his chest. "Over this snow-damp wool, you foolish man," she whispered. "You have been making wine." His breath caught. She did not kiss him. Not then. Some moments are too deep for haste. She only stood with her hand over his heart while the old horse shifted in the stall and the snow kept falling beyond the barn. Court was held in the schoolhouse because the county office roof had caved under snow. Calder Creek came to watch, dressed in its Sunday coats and weekday curiosity. The 4 children sat on the front bench, clean and pale. Samuel held Ruth's hand openly. Ben had his chin up, though Phoebe saw him rubbing his thumb against a scar in the wood. Lottie wore a blue ribbon Phoebe had found in a sewing box and hesitated over until Micah quietly said, "Use it." Pritchard stood near the stove with papers in hand. Thomas Bell sat in the back, face troubled. Mrs. Vale and Mrs. Keene sat together, whispering behind gloved hands. Sheriff Crow stood near the door. Judge Harrell was a lean man with tired eyes and spectacles he cleaned often. He listened to Pritchard first. The storekeeper spoke of unpaid debt, unstable arrangements, moral concern, the burden of 4 children, the impropriety of a young woman residing in a widower's household. He used polished words to say ugly things. Phoebe sat still through it, hands folded. Micah stood when calm. His suit was all dark and tied across the shoulders. He held his hat in one hand. "Mr. Turner," the judge said, "you seek guardianship of these children?" "Yes." "With Miss Allison?" "Yes." "What relation are you?" Micah looked at the children. Ruth's red cup sat beside her on the bench, polished bright from handling. "None by blood, thin. Why take responsibility?" The room waited. Micah's eyes moved to Phoebe, then back to the judge. "Because no one wanted 4, he said. They wanted one who was small enough, one old enough to work, one easy to place, or none at all. Miss Allison saw 4 children where others saw a burden. I had empty rooms and thought that made me generous. It didn't. She made the place a home. The children did the rest." Pritchard shifted. "Pretty words don't answer legal concerns." Micah turned toward him. "Then here are numbers. Miss Allison's debt is paid in full as of yesterday, with receipt filed. My household account at your store is closed. Dr. Harlan has submitted a statement that the children are fed, clothed, and recovering health. Mrs. Keene and Mrs. Vale have signed witness that Miss Allison earns respectable wages by work. Sheriff Crow has seen the sleeping arrangements. You have no concern left, except the one you brought with you." A murmur rolled through the room. Judge Harrow tapped his spectacles once on the desk. "Miss Ellison, Stan." Phoebe rose. Her knees felt uncertain, but her voice did not. "Did Mr. Turner pressure you into this petition?" "No, sir. Do you understand the responsibility of 4 children?" She almost smiled. "Better today than I did the day I took them." Soft laughter moved through the schoolhouse and died quickly. The judge looked at her over his spectacles. "Why should the court believe this arrangement will harm?" Phoebe looked at Samuel first. His eyes met hers, brave and terrified. Then Lottie, who had sewn the hem of Ruth's dress twice, because she worried the judge would see a loose thread. Ben, who had tried to pay a debt with 3 eggs and nearly lost his foot. Ruth, whose cup had survived hunger, fever, and the road from grief. Then she looked at Micah. "Because holding has become our work," she said. "Not feeling, not talk, work. There is bread every morning. There is wood by the stove. There are beds with names to them. There is a fence repaired so the cow doesn't wander, and a gate that closes. There is medicine when fever comes and sound in the room, when fear listens too hard. I cannot promise ease. I can promise they will not be divided for being inconvenient." The judge's face softened, though he tried to hide it. Pritchard stood. "And what of the moral question?" This time, another voice answered from the back. Thomas Bell rose slowly. His wife was not with him. Shame colored his face, but he spoke clearly. "I courted Phoebe Allison once," he said. I left when her father's debts became known. That was my cowardice, not her stain. I have heard talk these weeks and said nothing against it. That was cowardice too. If this court wants a measure of her character, let it be known she kept faith with children others abandoned, while men like me measured safety first. The room went dead silent. Phoebe stared at him, stunned. Thomas sat. Mrs. Keene dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief and pretended not to. Judge Harrow cleared his throat. Mr. Pritchard, unless you have evidence beyond insinuation, sit down. Pritchard's mouth opened, then closed. He sat. The ruling came like a door unlocking. Temporary joint guardianship granted, to be reviewed in spring. Children to remain together at the Turner residence, under the care of Phoebe Ellison and Micah Turner. Debt acknowledged as paid. No further claim. Ruth did not understand until Samuel bent and whispered to her. Then she climbed down from the bench, ran to Phoebe, and wrapped both arms around her waist. Ben followed, trying to look as if he had only happened to lean there. Lottie cried quietly. Samuel stood apart for one trembling second before Micah put a hand on his shoulder. The boy did not pull away. Outside the schoolhouse, snow had begun to melt from the eaves in bright drops. People came with awkward words. Mrs. Vale offered a quilt. Mrs. Keene promised more laundry if Phoebe wanted it. Sheriff Crow shook Micah's hand and then Phoebe's, which told the town something too. Pritchard came last, lips tight. He held out a receipt as if it were a dead mouse. Phoebe took it. Business is business, he said. Micah stepped beside her, but Phoebe touched his sleeve. No, she said quietly. Let me. She looked at Pritchard. Business might be business, but children are not accounts. Remember that before you tally yourself empty. He turned red and walked away. Micah looked down at her. You didn't need me? No, she said. But I wanted you there. The answer went through him visibly. Christmas came with clear cold and a sky sharp enough to ring. There was no grand celebration at the Turner Ranch, no silver, no piled gifts, but Phoebe made biscuits with white flour and opened a jar of preserves she had been saving without knowing for what. Micah cut a small pine and stood it in a bucket by the window. Lottie tied scraps of cloth on the branches. Ben hung 3 blown eggshells carefully saved and declared them better than glass because hens made them. Ruth placed her red cup beneath the tree, said it was not a present, only resting. Samuel carved a small wooden horse for Ruth with Micah's knife and Phoebe's anxious supervision. Lottie made Ben a pouch for his egg tally papers. Ben gave Samuel a smooth creek stone he had found before the snow and kept hidden. Ruth gave everyone a button from her pocket, none matching, all precious. For Micah, Phoebe had mended Ellen's blue shawl where one edge had frayed. She gave it to him folded in brown paper after the children slept. His face changed when he opened it. I didn't alter it, she said quickly. Only strengthened the seam. He touched the cloth with 2 fingers. She'd be glad? Phoebe's eyes stung. I hope so. He stood and walked to the peg by the door where the shawl had hung untouched for years. For a moment she thought he would put it back. Instead, he brought it to her and laid it around her shoulders. Phoebe stopped breathing. It was made for warmth, he said. She touched the faded blue edge. Micah. He took something from his vest pocket then. Her father's watch. He had polished the brass, and though the glass remained cracked, it ticked steady now. Didn't want to make it too new, he said. Some cracks tell where a thing survived. She took it, tears slipping free at last. I have nothing fine for you, she whispered. He smiled then, small and real. Phoebe Ellison, you brought noise into my house. She laughed through tears, and he reached for her hand. This time, when their fingers met, neither pulled away. Spring came slowly to Idaho mountain country. Snow withdrew from the fence lines. Mud took over the yard. The creek ran brown and loud. The hens grew bold. Mrs. General hatched 6 chicks under Ben's proud and unbearable supervision. Lottie's cheeks filled out, and her cough became rare enough that Phoebe sometimes went a whole day without listening for it. Ruth no longer asked whether she would come back when she left a room. Samuel grew an inch and began to whistle, badly, when currying the horses. The unused upstairs room was open on a March afternoon. Micah stood before the door with his hand on the latch. Phoebe stood beside him, not touching close enough. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." Inside, dust lay over a cradle, a small chest, folded quilts, and a wooden horse half-carved. The air was stale with years. Micah did not enter at first. Then Ruth slipped past them, solemn as church, carrying her red cup. She set it in the cradle. "For the baby that was," she said. Phoebe closed her eyes. Micah made a sound deep in his throat. He knelt, not caring about dust, and covered his face with one hand. Samuel stood awkwardly in the hall until Phoebe nodded. Then the boy went in and laid his hand on Micah's shoulder. No one spoke for a long time. After that they cleaned the room. Not all at once. Not like erasing. They opened curtains, beat dust from quilts, put the cradle in the attic wrapped carefully, kept the wooden horse on the shelf. Lottie washed the window. Ben found a marble and claimed it was treasure. Ruth took back her cup and said the baby had only needed to borrow it. By April, the room became a sewing and schoolroom. A slate leaned against the wall. Books lined the shelf. The old reef remained, but it no longer owned the door. On a warm evening after planting potatoes, Micah found Phoebe in the garden, tying pea vines to brush. The sunset lay gold across the repaired fence. Curtains Phoebe had sewn from flour sacks moved in the open window. Supper waited inside. Beans, bread, fried onions, and a pie cooling beyond Ben's reach if God was merciful. Micah leaned on the gate. "Judge comes next week," he said, "for the review. Sir." Phoebe tied another vine. "Doctor will speak. Sheriff too. And after." She looked at him. He took off his hat. Even after all these months, shyness could still find him at the strangest times. "I spoke to Reverend Vale," he said. Her hands stilled on the twine. "Not to set anything," he added quickly. "Not to presume. Only to ask what would be needed if a woman ever agreed to marry a man with a patched ranch. Fewer acres than last year, 4 children halfway a while, and a shoulder that complains before rain." Phoebe looked at the pea vines, because if she looked at him too soon, she might cry. "That sounds like a great burden for any woman," she said. "It does. Does the man drink all the coffee? He can be corrected. Does he defend names in public when he has sense enough? Does he allow hens in the kitchen? No." She smiled. "Then there might be difficulty. Ruth has been training one." Micah stepped into the garden. "Phoebe," the way he said her name was not a question, yet it did ask everything. She turned. He stood with his hat in both hands. The mountains behind him. The house beyond her. Children's voices drifting through the open window. Not a perfect man. Not a man without ghosts. But a man who had sold land to keep children whole. Who had learned to ask instead of command. Who left coffee warm and mended gloves too small for him. Who opened a room grief had locked. "Yes," she said. His breath left him. "You haven't heard me ask? I've heard you asking since December." He laughed once, soft and broken with relief. She stepped closer. "Ask anyway." He swallowed. "Phoebe Ellison, will you make this house yours in law, as you already have, in every way that matters? Will you marry me, and let me stand beside you with the children, not ahead, not over, but beside?" She took his rough hands. "Yes, Micah Turner, I will." Inside the house, something crashed. Ben shouted. "It wasn't the pie," Lottie shouted. It was exactly the pie. Ruth began crying because she thought the pie had died. Samuel appeared at the window, took one look at Phoebe and Micah holding hands in the garden, and grinned so wide he looked suddenly like the boy he had not been allowed to be. "Are we in trouble?" he called. Micah looked at Phoebe. She wiped her eyes and laughed. All of us, likely. The wedding took place in May under the cottonwood where the old swing hung. Reverend Vale read from the Bible with a voice that shook only once. Mrs. Keene brought flowers from her yard. Sheriff Crow stood in his good coat. Thomas Bell came alone, shook Micah's hand, and told Phoebe he was glad for her. She believed him enough to smile. Pritchard did not come, but his wife sent a sack of sugar without a note. Phoebe wore a plain cream dress she had sewn by lamplight, with Ellen's blue shawl over her shoulders. Micah wore the dark suit from court, and a new tie Samuel had helped choose. Ruth carried the rings in her red cup, walking slowly, as though bearing treasure for a queen. Ben scattered flower petals with the same motion he used to feed hens. Lottie cried before anyone began. Samuel stood beside Micah, solemn and proud, his hair slicked down badly. When Reverend Vale asked who gave blessing to this union, Ruth piped, "All four." The Reverend blinked. The crowd laughed softly. Micah looked down at the children. Foul dough, after vows were spoken. After the simple kiss that made Lottie sob harder and Ben cover Ruth's eyes too late, they ate at long tables in the yard. There was chicken, beans, bread, preserves, coffee, and 3 pies, because Phoebe had learned from disaster. The repaired gate stood open. The corral fence ran straight. Laundry snapped clean on the line. Hens scratched under the lilac starts. Phoebe had moved from her old farm before handing the cabin to a young couple who needed a beginning. Near sunset, Phoebe stood on the porch watching the children chase fireflies in the yard. Ruth had tied blue string around the red cup and hung it from the porch nail, finally able to leave it somewhere and trust it would remain. Lottie sat on the step, hemming a doll blanket. Ben argued with Mrs. General, who had invaded the wedding crumbs. Samuel helped Micah bank the barn door, their shoulders moving in the same rhythm. Micah came to the porch with 2 cups of coffee. "Kept it warm," he said. Phoebe took one. "You're learning." He leaned beside her, close enough that their sleeves touched. The sun dropped behind the Idaho mountains, laying amber over the barn roof, the woodpile, the garden rows, the pump handle polished by many hands. Inside, the table waited to be cleared. Upstairs, beds waited with quilts turned down. In the kitchen, her father's watch ticked on the shelf, steady despite its cracked face. Phoebe looked at the yard that had once seemed full of broken things. No one had wanted 4 children that cold Sunday morning. Folks had seen mouths to feed, beds to fill, trouble to manage, shame to avoid. But love, when it came, had not arrived as a feeling first. It came as wood split before snow, fever watched through the night, debts faced in daylight, a gate repaired, a cup protected, a boy pulled from ice, a room open, a name defended, and coffee kept warm on the stove. And if you ever pass through old Idaho mountain country and see a porch at sunset, with curtains moving in the window and children's laughter caught in the cottonwood leaves, remember this: a home is not made by the people who wanted no trouble. It is made by the ones who saw trouble standing hungry in the rain and opened the door anyway.